is for. They burned books for over 300 years for the purpose of putting the world into darkness, and also to overthrow the sovereigns of the planet, which is the Canaanite Moabites, the Moors, etc. The Europeans, by being hybrids, etc., were ceded Europe by the Moors themselves, even moving the Druid order out of the area of the land of Angles for them to have a land for themselves. The popes of Rome took it upon themselves to declare themselves gods of the earth and to destroy civilization. In other words, their issue was to conquer civilization. Much of the principles that was preserved even after the great earthquake, they maintained in secret societies by which they ruled and created what is known as a dogma system for the masses. Thus, the Spanish Inquisition and the torture tools, which includes the vagina pair, the mouth pair, the anal pair, the mouth hook, the Iron Maiden, etc., by which they used to convert Asiatics to worship of Rome and Constantine, and then later adopted the word Jesus through the Nicene Council, etc., that they used at the Nicene Council as a password, etc., in order to hide both the history and also to enslave people and to establish a dogmatic worship system of the popes of Rome, saying it was Jesus and God, when they know that God is a verb transitive, knowing that the masses have never been given religion because God is not a noun, God is a verb transitive, and all high priests know that. It's a deceptive order for mind control. Now, of course, all high priests, all adepts, all grand chiefs, all rabbis, all imams, all persons with what is known as PhDs or doctorate or philosophy degrees get their degrees by virtue of understanding that in the rituals that they do in all societies, from ancient Africa, ancient Kemet, etc., ancient Yucatan on up to the day, which is represented by the altar and the three candlesticks, i.e. representing light and wisdom, third rock from the sun, the principle of third dimension that we operate in the physical plane. Also the first candlelight representing belief with its reflection, which is neophyte, and the second candle representing faith with its reflection, reflection being scholar, and then the third candlelight, which is fruition, with its reflection being master, and that all persons with the leadership degrees get their master's degree by virtue of understanding those fundamental philosophical principles. And when the masses that they've been misleading would be the best word to say, not leading, misleading, have no aware, most of them are not even aware of a fruition degree. They're aware of the belief degree, and they're aware of the faith degree, and for the most part, not even knowing that they're degrees.
Yeah, I understand that from the religious, scientific point of view. As far as the creation of Europeans, from the story of Yokub and so forth, but who contradicts that? And is Booker T.
Well, that's
right.
That goes through an Oxford.
No, so I'm saying a lot of the temples and a lot of the YouTube videos, they're all caught up on race and they're all caught up on this issue, and it's the same story. No, but I'm saying the same story. But I'm saying like I look at people as human beings, and for us to say that we created another race of human beings to be slaves, what does that say about us? And
exactly. Now you understand why we fell.
Let me finish. So, and then if those human beings that we create to be slaves, if they can come and enslave us, why would we complain? Wouldn't that be sort of divine retribution? And wouldn't that be our fault in the first place?
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, so I don't understand. Like, why can we not move on from that? Why cannot we not go to noble Jerusalem to link ourselves back to the human family and act as civilized human beings without bringing the racism into anything? Yes.
That's why you're being brought back into your consciousness, because you paid the debt. That's why the fall, he tells you right in the literature. Why did the Moors fall? They adopted the idol gods of Europe that they knew nothing of. And we abandoned the principles of our ancient mothers and fathers. He tells you that. That's not held back from you. That's not a lack of understanding. You go to an Oxford dictionary, and the European will tell you himself in the Oxford dictionary that he's a hybrid. Can you hear me?
I understand, but I also know that I don't believe everything I read. And I also
Well,
know
you
that
don't have to. You don't. It's not for you to believe. It's not for you to believe anything.
No.
Believe your treatment.
Truth is personal experience, and
Yes.
and
Believe your treatment. Believe your treatment, and go to your
and nature's truth.
That'll tell you everything you
Yeah.
need to know.
That's just
Carol, you're gonna have to limit your time.
like nature's truth. And when we talked about the formation of the whole concept of races is so new in the first place. The
And that was
1800s.
created by Germans, so you must know the history.
So
Race
the
is a fiction of
concept of
sociology.
nature is
No,
that
Carol,
when
hold
we
on.
say
Carol,
we're Europeans.
Carol, hold on a sec. Brother Taj, could you talk on the importance of Noble Drew Ali's literature and it getting us out of the mental slavery that we're in?
This is what Noble Drew Ali said.
That's what I said. Why are we talking
Noble
about
Drew
it
said-
if we're not out of it?
Huh?
Why are we talking about it if we're not out of the mental slavery? Why are we talking about what the Europeans did, what the Europeans did?
It is
Why don't we
to
just
break
bring the
mental
information of
slavery
what we
because
should
that's
do?
what
Well, you have to listen,
That
yo.
was the Treaty of Verona to create the mental slavery. That's what dogma was created for.
Islam.
Alright, we're gonna have to move on. Taj, we're gonna move on to the next question.
Taj.
Because of the timing, brother. You
But
have to be
I still
fair.
like the
You have to be
question.
fair
Islam,
and equal to everybody here.
We're told that Noble Drew Ali is our sovereign, and that we should hold him as the sovereign.
In other words, you must understand the world politics to even understand why we're even doing what we're doing. This is the reason why I gave you a background.
Islam. So
Because it doesn't make sense to people that are dealing with emotions about what they feel about history. That's why you must teach the history so they can see the history and relate to it and understand why Europeans have done what they've done. And it's like the brothers say, they're not, how do you say, totally guilty. This is why anyone who gives us information, we're told that we are equally guilty for this condition.
Right.
That's why in
Islam.
the divine warning to the nations, the prophet says what? It is the life that we've been living. Didn't he say that?
Islam.
Islam.
We're not playing self-righteous. Not only that,
Islam.
when you start talking racism, that was created by social engineers in Germany. Do your research.
Islam.
It's a
Islam.
fraud. Race is the species.
Islam.
Islam.
Racism as it's presented is a social engineering dynamic. It's not a reality.
Yeah.
Say it, because you're distracting me.
Islam.
No, what I'm saying is that
Islam.
what I'm getting from what he's saying that he may have missed is that, because I heard him say it, is that there's only one race.
It's the
And that's,
species.
and it's a species. That's all of us. We didn't create some new or different race. This is where
It's just a
people,
hybrid.
this is where people get this thing wrong, that we created some new race.
There's no
And the
creation,
other
it's hybrid.
the other thing that I get is also that no matter what, we're paying for that debt, as he said, it's not self-righteousness, but no matter what occurs, we're the mothers and fathers of civilization. And in order for it to get back right, for instance, a European is not the sovereign and never will be.
Oh,
The
yes.
sovereigns are tied, if I can use that term, to the land. They're not. So even here, they're talking about this new sovereign thing, and they're talking all this stuff, but there's only one thing missing. They are not the sovereign.
Islam. Just to
Islam.
speak on that though, I just wanted to ask, at law, the term sovereign, is that appropriate to be used by all of us, or do we use one person as our sovereign?
It's used loosely and not thoroughly, as you implied, and which you already understand, not properly represented. Because the sovereign simply is the original people of the planet Earth, which is the Spanish Inquisition was designed to overthrow the sovereign.
Islam. So then, is it appropriate that all of us declaring our nationality are thereby sovereigns, or by birthright sovereigns?
No, in other words, what is really necessary is for people to understand what sovereignty is. Give me a friend. What sovereignty is. And when they're looking at sovereignty, basically the way, for the most part, that is presented by most people right now, it creates properly, as you can see, a misconception, because people mostly think it's some package that you can go buy, or it's some statement that you can go make, and therefore you are, simply because of the, how do you say, someone saying that's laws given by God, etc., when they don't even know what God means. Now, that doesn't dismiss their intention. However, that's not what makes a sovereign. The sovereign is the direct descendants of the firstborn or the first occupants of what is known universally on the planet as the aboriginals of the planet called Earth, which is traced directly from Canaanite, Moabite persons, or also those after the great Super Devere, that's the dividing of the land between Ham and Cush, which is called Hebrew, or what you call the Hebrew, etc. And that's a political reality. Has nothing to do with anything that you might or anyone else might call what their perceptions may be, religious, etc. Is misconception, is the real politics. It's no different than you yourself having a house and you're the first on the land, and then somebody conquers you, and then they're claiming to be the sovereign. No, they just defeated the sovereign, that's all. Are we clear?
Islam.
This is why Europeans, like when they did the Spanish Inquisition, etc. What is the policy that is proven document that they use in order to claim the resources and the rights of the sovereign in North America? They don't call themselves Europeans, do they? They call themselves Americans, don't they?
Yes.
That's called trading places, isn't it? Are Europeans Americans?
No.
No.
Does that have anything to do with bad feelings for them or against them?
No.
Or does it have to do with the truth?
No.
Truth.
Huh?
Truth.
Truth.
That has to do with the truth. It has nothing about what I feel, you feel, anyone else feel. The European is a colonist, isn't he?
Islam.
Of course.
Now, just because some of our people forgot that, does a European forget that?
No.
Or because he doesn't have a conversation about it?
No.
All right, now can an Englishman be sovereign in Russia?
No.
No.
Can a Russian be sovereign in Mexico?
No.
How about can an Argentinian be sovereign in France?
No.
No.
Can a Frenchman be sovereign in France?
Yes.
Yes.
Or can a German be sovereign in Germany?
Yes.
Can an Argentinian be sovereign in Argentina?
Yes.
Therefore, is it hard for anyone to understand that Europeans aren't sovereign here?
Yes.
Can you and I right now, even though we know the real history, and even though the nobles, etc., from a political perspective, in reality, law, and justice, go to England right now, set up a DMV, and then charge Englishmen for traveling on their own land?
Nope.
No.
And then someone talk about they're confused about sovereignty.
Islam.
Is it hard to understand that?
No.
Can a child understand that?
Yes.
All right, what's so difficult for us to understand that these Europeans can't be sovereign here?
Emotion and fear.
Big time.
Exactly,
Big
and
time.
misunderstanding.
Big time.
That's all.
Islam.
Because we're dealing with real politics now. We're not dealing with emotions and beliefs, although people take their emotions and beliefs into it. We need to deal with the facts.
Islam.
Islam, my man.
Now, this is another reason why the nations of the earth are selling all the UST bonds. Are you clear?
Yes.
Because they are leaned against the Moroccan Empire State.
Yes.
Are we clear?
Islam.
And so therefore their operations are a securities and exchange for-profit religious corporation as distinguished from the land, and we must understand that irregardless of what our personal views of the politics are or are not.
Islam.
That's a fact and provable anywhere on the planet.
Islam.
Are we clear?
Yes.
Now I'm going to read to conceptually help some who may not understand records directly from the United States Congress, the floor of the Congress, in the presence of the President pro tempore, all the congressmen and the senators that are allegedly representatives of the United States of North America and its Republican form of government established and chartered in 1781. Are we prepared to hear?
Islam.
From the records of the House of Representatives, from the floor of the House, the records so speak word for word. I will clarify when I end the speech, and I will stay in the context of the speech, which we'll discuss after the fact. Are we clear?
Islam.
United States of North America, Speaker Representative James Traficant Jr. of Ohio, addressing the House of Representatives from the congressional records. This can be found in the congressional records. Mr. Speaker, we are here today now in Chapter 11, and members of Congress are official trustees presiding over the greatest reorganization of any bankrupt entity in world history, the U.S. government. We are setting forth, hopefully, a blueprint for our future. And there are some who say it is a coroner's report that will lead to our demise. It is an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act of March the 9th, 1933, 48 Statute 1, Public Law 89-719, declared by President Roosevelt being bankrupt and insolvent, HJR 190 through to the 73rd Congress in session June the 5th, 1933, joint resolution to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause, dissolved the sovereign authority of the United States and the official capacities of all United States governmental offices, officers, and departments, and is further evidence that the United States federal government exists today in name only. The receivers of the United States bankruptcy are the international bankers via the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. All United States offices, officials, and departments are now operating within a de facto status, in name only, and under the emergency war powers with the constitutional Republican form of government now dissolved, and the receivers of the bankruptcy have adopted a new form of government for the United States, and this new form of government is known as a democracy, being an established socialist communist order under a new governor for America. And this act was instituted and established by transferring and or placing the office of the Secretary of Treasury to that of the Governor of the International Monetary Fund. Public Law 94-564, page 8, section HR 13955, and reads in part, the United States Secretary of Treasury receives no compensation for representing the United States. Gold and silver were such a powerful money during the founding of the United States of America that the founding fathers declared that only gold and silver coins can be money, quote unquote, in America. And since gold and silver coinage were heavy and inconvenient for a lot of transactions, they were stored in banks, and a claim check was issued as a money substitute. And people traded their coupons as money, or quote unquote currency. Currency is not money, but a money substitute. And redeemable currency must promise to pay a dollar equivalent in gold or silver money. Federal Reserve notes, which shall be represented in this text by FRNs, makes no such promises and are not money, quote unquote. A Federal Reserve note is a debt obligation of the federal United States government and is not money, quote unquote. And the federal United States government and the U.S. Congress were not and have never been authorized by the Constitution or the United States of America to issue currency of any kind, but only lawful money, gold and silver coin. And it is essential that we comprehend the distinction between real money and paper money substitute. And one can get rich by accumulating, one cannot get rich by accumulating paper substitutes. And one can only get deeper in debt. And we the people no longer have any money, quote unquote. And most, pardon me, hold on. And most Americans have not been paid any money for a very long time, perhaps not in their entire life. And now, do you comprehend why you feel broke? How do you understand why you are bankrupt, quote unquote, along with the rest of the country? Federal Reserve notes are unsigned checks written on a closed account. And FRNs are an inflatable paper currency designed to create debt through inflation and parenthesized devaluation of currency. And whenever there is an increase in the supply of money substitute in the economy without a corresponding increase in the gold and silver backing, inflation occurs. And inflation is an invisible form of taxation that irresponsible governments inflict upon their citizens. And the Federal Reserve Bank, who controls the supply and movement of FRNs, has everybody fooled. And they have access to an unlimited supply of FRNs, paying only for the printing cost of what they need. And FRNs are nothing more than promissory notes for the U.S. Treasury securities, quote unquote, T-bills, a promise to pay the debt to the Federal Reserve Bank. And there is a fundamental difference between paying, quote unquote, and discharging, quote unquote, a debt. And to pay a debt, you must pay with value or substance, i.e. gold, silver, barter, or a commodity. And with FRNs, you can only discharge a debt. You cannot pay a debt with a debt currency system. And you cannot service a debt with a currency that has no backing in value or in substance. And no contract in common law is valid unless it involves an exchange of good and valuable consideration, quote unquote. An unpayable debt transfers power and control to the sovereign power structure that has no interest in money, law, equity, or injustice, because they have so much wealth already. And their lust is for power and control. And since the inception of central banking, they have controlled the fate of nations. The Federal Reserve System is based on the quote-unquote canon law and the principles of sovereignty protected in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. In fact, the international bankers used a quote-unquote canon law trust as their model, and adding stock and naming it a quote-unquote joint stock trust. The United States Congress had passed a law making it illegal for any legal quote-unquote person to duplicate a joint stock trust quote-unquote in 1873. And the Federal Reserve Act was legislated post facto to 1870, although post facto laws are strictly forbidden by the Constitution, which is Article 1, 9, Clause 3. And the Federal Reserve System is a sovereign power structure, separate and distinct from the federal United States government. And the Federal Reserve is a maritime lender and or maritime insurance underwriter to the federal United States, operating exclusively under Admiralty maritime law. And the lender or underwriter bears the risks, and the maritime law compelling specific performance in paying the interest or premiums are the same. And assets of the debtor can also be hypothecated to pledge something as a surety without taking possession of it, as surety by the lender or underwriter. And the Federal Reserve Act stipulated that the interest on the debt was to be paid in gold. Now, there was no stipulation in the Federal Reserve Act for ever paying the principal. And prior to 1913, pay attention to this date, prior to 1913, most Americans owned clear allodial title to property, free and clear of any liens or mortgages until the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. I'm continuing. Hold on. These are pages out of sequence. And so they hypothecated all property within the United States to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, in which the trustees or stockholders held legal title. Legal title, but not lawful title. Keep that in mind. The United States citizens listed as tenants and franchisee was registered as a beneficiary, quote unquote, of the trust via his or her birth certificate. And in 1933, the Federal United States hypothecated all of the present and future properties, assets, and their labor of their quote unquote subjects, the 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, to the Federal Reserve System. And in return, the Federal Reserve agreed to extend the Federal United States Corporation all the credit money substitute it needed, quote unquote. And like any other debtor, the Federal United States government had to assign collateral and security to their creditors as a condition of the loan. And since the Federal United States didn't have any assets, they assigned the private property of their economic slaves, the U.S. citizens, as collateral against the unpayable federal debt. And they also pledged the unincorporated federal territories, national parks, the forests, birth certificates, and non-profit organizations as collateral against the federal debt. And all has been transferred as payment to the international bankers. And unwittingly, America has returned to its pre-American Revolution feudal roots, whereby all land is held by a sovereign and the common people had no rights to hold the allodial title to property. And once again, we the people are tenants and sharecroppers renting our own property from a sovereign in the guise of the Federal Reserve Bank. And we the people have exchanged one master for another. And this has been going on for over 80 years without the informed knowledge, quote unquote, of the American people, and without a voice protesting loud enough. And now it's easy to grasp why America is fundamentally bankrupt. And why don't more people own their properties outright? Why are 90% of Americans mortgaged to the hilt and have little or no assets after all debts and liabilities have been paid? And why does it feel like you are working harder and harder and getting less and less? And we are reaping what has been sown. And the result of our harvest is a painful bankruptcy and a foreclosure on American property, precious liberties, and way of life. And few of our elected representatives in Washington, D.C. have dared to tell the truth. And the Federal United States is bankrupt. And our children will inherit this unpayable debt and the tyranny to enforce paying it. America has become completely bankrupt in world leadership, completely bankrupt in financial credit, and completely bankrupt in its reputation for courage, vision, and human rights. And this is an undeclared economic war, bankruptcy, and economic slavery of the most corrupt order. Wake up, America. Take your country.
Islam.
Now, the culpable actions and activities revealed and exposed by Representative James Traficant in his speech that ends with the word country. This is a statement after the fact. And the culpable actions and activities revealed and exposed by Representative James Traficant in his speech before the House of Representatives gives proof to the treasonous acts of sitting politicians. And party affiliations are irrelevant. And the common thread that is weaved throughout both monopolized political parties, Republican or Democrat, leaves no doubt as to their predetermined, pre-existing, and integrity compromised agendas. And they did this, what, in 1913? When was the Moorish Holy Temple of Science established?
1913.
Old Karnak temple is a counter move. It's dealing with the politics of the world. And thus Noble Drew Ali said what? The 14th and 15th Amendments not necessary for the salvation of my people and citizens?